On July 7th, 1985, Makimura, aka Ghosts and Goblins, was unleashed on the arcades of Japan. Roughly a year later, an abomination was ported to the Famicom. It's Ghosts and Goblins for the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Family Computer. If the goal of Ghosts and Goblins is to make you salty, it succeeds. I don't remember the last time I got so frustrated playing a single player game. Maybe never. This is a game that goes out of its way to punish the player for no good reason. If you're unaware though, Ghosts and Goblins is an arcade-style action platformer, where the player assumes the role of a knight named Arthur on his quest to save Princess Prin-Prin. Developed by Capcom and published by Taito originally, the arcade version of this game was apparently a big hit and a huge commercial success in Japan. It wasn't ported by Capcom though. That was handled by a company called Micronix, also known for their work on Athena, Ikari Warriors, and the Famicom port of 1942. The Famicom version of this game is what I own, but I ended up playing mostly on the North American release because the Famicom version does not have continues. Ghosts and Goblins is unfairly difficult. It feels like it needs another word to describe it that's separate from hard. Part of this is due to the design of the game being genuinely bothersome, but the other part is mainly due to technical failures that make the game even more frustrating to play. The result of this port is a functioning but very messy translation of a game that was already known to drive players mad. It is a side-scroller that can barely handle side-scrolling. The enemies appear out of thin air. There are glitches that cause you to take damage for no reason, and even when the enemies are on screen, the flickering can get so bad that they come out of nowhere anyway. The game is divided into 6 main stages with a final stage that is just the final boss battle. 4 of these stages have a halfway checkpoint, but the final 2 stages do not. There are a variety of enemies and pickups that really only amount to points. And then there are the weapons, which are somewhat notorious because most of them are worse than your starting weapon and end up functioning more like another obstacle, as if the game needed more obstacles. And then each stage concludes with a boss fight. As a whole, this game functions like a night of trick-or-treating without any of the treats. And because I feel it's worth mentioning for the integrity of this review, I played this game without the use of save states. Since I ended up using the EverDrive due to the Famicom's lack of continues, I had the option to use save states, but I chose not to. The one exception was when I was done playing in between sessions and I wanted to save my progress without leaving my AV Famicom on for over 24 hours. I just didn't want to put my actual hardware at risk by leaving it on for that long since it is so old. So it's the only instance that I used one. The authentic experience is very important to me. So, with that out of the way, I'm going to go through my experience playing this game stage by stage and explain what I liked about the game and then all of the different instances that made it overall really frustrating. And in the end, I'll tell you whether or not I think this game is really worth enduring. The game opens with Princess Prin-Prin getting abducted right out from under you. This is actually kind of a cool intro segment because you actually watch the princess get abducted as opposed to something like Zelda or Mario where the princess is off somewhere else and the only things that have to do with her is explained in the manual or in the backstory. It's not really strong enough to serve as a genuine motivation on its own, but it's something worth noting. And so with stage 1, it might be the only stage in the entire game that beginning to end is like a good level. There's just more good than bad here. And if you've never played before, you will die on this stage. But it doesn't take too much to get through and it never feels impossible, especially if you're using the knife. Really anything but the torch. It's a pretty well-paced level. It exposes you to zombies first to kind of get you used to your movement and jumping, and it'll teach you through death that you can only take 2 hits, and that when you jump, you cannot make adjustments mid-air. You're committing fully to a jump forward, a jump backward, or a jump up, and immediately straight back down. You can change directions mid-air though to fire projectiles. This portion also shows you the plant enemies that fire projectiles, as well as the crows, which only fly towards you once they spot you. But that's exclusive to this level, and later levels they just fly willy-nilly. And then the middle portion of this stage has sort of a pre-boss fight with an enemy that is in some ways more difficult than the actual boss of the level. This enemy, like most other enemies in Ghosts and Goblins, goes by a variety of names, but it's most commonly referred to as a red devil. Lots of people really seem to hate this enemy, but I found that on a flat plane, I actually really enjoy the fight. It feels impossible and kind of stupid at first, but once you find a strategy that works for you, it's really satisfying. For me, that strategy was running and jumping away while firing shots behind me. So once you defeat the red devil, you move on to a checkpoint where there are some ghost-like enemies that fly up and down, and those are really only seen in this one part of the game. In this part of the game, you have to make your way through the forest to fight the little blanketed ghost-looking enemies. I really find these to be mostly frustrating because they flicker and appear out of nowhere. They are worse in later levels though. The final portion of this level concludes with a boss fight with an enemy known as the unicorn. And from there you get a key that allows you to progress to the next stage. This is the basic formula of each level to come. Stage 2 is hot garbage. It starts you off in a blue pillared area, which you may even forget is part of the stage later on because most of your time is going to be spent after the checkpoint. This game is manageable until this point, but it goes off the rails here. You have these big goblin-looking enemies that can sprint at you, shoot projectiles, drop projectiles from on top of you, and they can directly impede your ability to progress by standing on top of where you need to go. And once you do confront them, they take 10 hits to kill. 10 hits. There are also crows dashing from side to side indefinitely while you're trying to make it through this structure. You have to go up and then down, and if you take a hit, it's unlikely you're going to survive the next part. But sometimes you don't even make it to the building section without taking some hits first. There's a crow immediately at the start, but only sometimes, and then you have to walk past an abandoned building that has little blue devils coming out of the windows, and sometimes they're just impossible to avoid. If you do make it to the top though, depending on your route, a torch may drop in your path, and you're actually better off starting the level over than picking up the torch. Getting the torch is like basically just, it's worse than a game over because at least you start with your weapon back after a game over. The torch can only fire twice at a time, and if the fire hits the ground, you'll have to wait for it to finish burning in order to throw it again. It's slower, it works on an arc instead of firing straight, and it has a limited range. It's only there to put you at a disadvantage in the middle of everything else. But then after that, you have this atrocious platforming section with enemies spawning into you mid-jump, and you have to try and make hard platforms without falling and having to do it all over again. Just how miserable. It's just so bad. I made it through the big house maybe 1 time in 15 tries only to get to this point and fail in the water and drown and start again. The end of the level has you fighting 2 of the first boss. And the first time I made it there, I was almost out of time and I fought one and beat him. And then I saw the second one and was surprised, but I somehow managed to beat him and then watched the key fall down from the sky only to see my time run out. Like, why does the time not stop when you beat the boss if it's just an animation that you have to watch it come down? It's just like the little things, there is no concession made to the player. It's all just like made to with you, basically. Why does this game even have a timer? To punish you for making deliberate moves and having strategy? You have to sit and wait for enemies to move to a spot where you have a chance to progress. And speaking of that, there is a lot of chance involved in this game. When I finally did make it through to stage 3, it wasn't like I did anything special. Things just kind of worked out. I didn't feel like my performance was any better or worse. And the positive feelings I had were less related to actually beating the stage and more a feeling of relief knowing that I would not have to play this stage anymore. So stage 3 is hell if you don't like red devils. The opening segment is a bunch of BS, but getting through it isn't that bad. Once you hit the checkpoint, that's where you'll be using all your continues. The blue portion of the level has you making your way up and down what feels like a mountain inside of a cave. It takes the red devil fight, but instead puts it on an incline to where you can't use the satisfying and fun strategy in level 1 to get past them. So what this level ends up becoming is a practice in making it to a difficult part, dying and dying and dying and dying, developing a strategy, then moving on to the next part, dying and dying and dying and dying, developing a strategy, sometimes dying on the way to the second part, then to the third, and so on. But just because you have a strategy doesn't mean it'll always work. The little guys will get you if you aren't vigilant every second of the level. And this was the first level I noticed that there was a replacement armor if you got hit. Up towards the top, there's this part where these two little blue devils come out as you're going up, and if you jump down and you hit the right spot, an armor will spawn if you are in your underwear. I discovered it by complete accident, and it's so frustrating. There's no clues as to like where they may be. They are just hidden in the levels. And once you finally do beat the final red devil on the way to the boss of this stage, which is a dragon, there's a torch you have to jump over, which I accidentally landed on once, and there's also an item that if you pick it up, it turns you into a frog, and you just have to hop around until you're not a frog because you can't attack as a frog. It's just like another practical joke. Haha, you don't get to beat the game. Like, the stage finishes with a dragon fight, which I found pretty cool, but there is apparently a known glitch which I suffered at the hands of, where sometimes if you approach the dragon a certain way, you will actually take a hit for no reason. You'll just get hurt before you even see the dragon. But this is where I made my most important discovery of this game, and it's something that I haven't seen anyone else talk about in any other Ghosts and Goblins NES Famicom video. If you place Arthur directly under the key after beating the boss and hold down on the D-pad, you won't do your victory pose until you release it. But you can change directions and you can fire projectiles. The victory pose is honestly one of the best parts of this game, and it also reminds me a little bit of a good friend of mine. So stage 3 is frustrating, but it's not as bad as stage 2 for me. Stage 4, though, is the most forgettable level in the entire game. It opens with a platforming segment that has you hopping on random clouds until you find the right ones to stand on. Then there's a red devil fight that pretty much doesn't matter because if you land, you're at a checkpoint. Then there's a segment with some blue devils and fire coming out from the ground, but compared to the earlier segments in this game, it was a cakewalk. And then the boss of this level is just a fight with the dragon again. So not really a big deal. The dragon's pretty manageable if you have the knife. So once you beat stage 4, from this point on, there are no more checkpoints. You have to beat the whole level, and if you die, you start again at the beginning. And stage 5 and 6 are particularly brutal. Stage 5 is similar to stage 3 in that it's a process of learning what the path to the top is and developing a methodology for how you're planning to progress. It sees the return of big boys and introduces a ton of skull-popping enemies that you have to crouch to hit before you can get too close. It has a more frustrating implementation of the blanket ghosts and concludes with a Satan boss fight. I had to try this level a bunch of times, but overall I thought it was pretty good, and it took me less continues than stage 2 or stage 3 did. This was a pretty good stage actually, save for waiting for the big boys and Pose appearing out of nowhere, but that's all worse in stage 2. That leaves us with the last real stage of the game, which is stage 6. I did not realize before starting this game that this stage has a bit of a reputation as one of the hardest, if not the hardest stage in video games ever. It's not a joke. Like, you pretty much have to bring your absolute A game for this level. The design of it is just sadistic. It opens with a blanket boy and a skull poppers and a javelin. The javelin's good, but if you have the knife, that's still better. You start off with a unicorn fight on a tiny ledge, but that's honestly not that bad compared to what's coming. The dragon fight is a massive pain without the knife, but something interesting happens where if you stroll too far to the left, a shield drops. The shield is a weapon that is actually required for you to beat the stage with. Luckily, I was familiar with this concept before going in, because if you don't beat this level with that weapon, you actually have to start all the way back at level 5. Just a massive troll. But since you're stuck with a weapon indefinitely after you pick it up until you pick up another weapon, I decided that I was gonna wait and pick it up at the end of the level after I defeated everything. I learned that was only half right though, as when I finally did beat the 2 Satans waiting for you at the top of the stage, the shield disappeared. So I was left with the option of letting time run out or going back to stage 5. Infuriating. But my first time I did pick up the shield just because I wanted to see how it worked, and it's actually a pretty good weapon. And it's not the end of the world if you do pick up one of these weapons. There is also an axe that I did try and a torch that I did not, because at the bottom the Poes spawn indefinitely and you can grind them until one of them drops your preferred weapon of choice, which for me it was the knife. And I really wanted to be one of those guys that was like, you don't need the knife to beat this game. And you technically don't, but it's just so much better than every other weapon, and the game is just such a load of BS that it was just like, just give me the knife, just give me the knife. But you know what's also annoying about this stage? The unicorn is immune to the shield. So you have to pick up the javelin, but you would only know that after trying and dying. So fine, the javelin. But then the dragon seems to be invincible to the javelin. At least his head seems to be. So you need the shield. What I ended up doing was getting the shield after beating the majority of the level before the final boss fight. The shield's a great weapon, but having to switch and get it back at the beginning of the stage because of the unicorn's invulnerability is just annoying. There is actually an armor pickup in this stage though, and it's pretty much required for beating unless you're just absolute MLG. But what my plan basically turned into was I would try and make my way up the stage, and if I had made it really far and it felt like I had a shot at beating it, if I did get hit when I would go down to get my armor, I would also go and get the shield. If it didn't work out, I'd just grind until I got the knife again, which would only really take like half of one stage and then you just die on purpose, because the infinite continues make this more of like a game where if you have the will to beat it, you will eventually, so long as you keep throwing yourself into the wall. But the latter part of this stage has big boys and skull poppers and a ton of red devils that feel almost ramped up a little bit in speed compared to the other ones. It's just such a difficult stage. If you accidentally go too far towards a sitting red devil, you have to fight them, and if you accidentally fire a shot their way by mistake, this also triggers them. There's also a glitch where sometimes a skull popper will pop above you, and that makes climbing the ladder even more difficult. Like, what are you supposed to do here? For that ladder in particular, you have to trigger the red devil and then climb back down to hope to beat him and then go back up. After that, if you have the shield, you're ready to go. Otherwise, you're gonna need to go back down and pick up the shield before fighting the final boss, or else you'll make the same mistake I did. The final boss is really hard, but it's not too hard. The most difficult part about it is getting to the final boss. So you're a little nervous when you get up there naturally, because you get up there maybe one in like 40 tries. But after finally defeating the 2 Satans and progressing to stage 7, stage 7 is just the final boss, Astaroth. And Astaroth is a complete chump. If you wanted something to actually be difficult in this game, make it the final boss. Make the final boss something cool, but it's not. It's just he fires a fireball down at a steep angle and you just kill him and then that's it. Or is that it? This room is an illusion and is a trap devised by Satan. Go ahead dauntlessly. Make rapid progress. You start the whole game over after beating it. And if you want to see the credits, you have to beat it twice in a row. The same stages, the same enemies, the same garbage, all over again. Yeah, I don't think so, buddy. I tried again just to see if the game was jiving with me, and I made it to stage 2 and was just having such a frustrating time with the big structure with all the big boys in it again that I decided I was done. I just realized I was completely miserable playing. I was beating it for beating its sake. And the only thing you get for beating it twice is a hug and another blob of text with multiple spelling errors. So it just wasn't worth it for me personally. And technically, I guess I didn't beat it, but if you're describing the game as having to beat it twice, then I beat it once. I didn't beat it twice, I beat it once, and I'm okay with beating it once. It honestly doesn't feel like it's worth it. It just doesn't feel like it deserves to be beat again. It feels like it deserves to be thrown in the trash. So, final thoughts on Ghosts and Goblins for the NES and Famicom. I feel ghosts and roblins of my time, my energy, and my life force. I was shouting out at times playing this game. I was squeezing the controller, hearing it creak, the plastic creak at the seams because of this game. It's just such a frustrating experience from beginning to end. It feels like the kind of game that people play just to say that they beat it. It doesn't feel like a game that on its own is worth it. I feel like I can't say that fully. There are parts of this game that are very fun. The sprites look fantastic. Especially Arthur himself. I loved the way that he jumped. The music is kind of annoying and does get really stuck in your head. I found myself humming the tune when I didn't want to afterwards. And the game is pretty addicting. It does get you into that loop and makes you want to progress further just by providing such a huge, substantial challenge. So there were times that I did feel like playing this game and going back to it, but it so quickly just makes you want to stop with the random tricks and practical jokes that it pulls on you. Like stage 2 is so miserable for me, and parts of stage 6, parts of stage 3. Overall, it's a frustrating mess, but it has an undeniable sort of addictive nature to it. Even if you find yourself being addicted to the frustration, it has a way of kind of getting in there and making you feel like you need to play more. But is it overall good? Is it overall worth playing? I would honestly recommend you not waste your time playing this game. Like, if you want to be part of the cool kids club and it's important to you to say that you beat it, then go ahead. But it just feels like a waste of energy, and it feels like it's designed just to make you mad. Like, maybe try the arcade version. I think I might try that at some point, but don't play this version. So overall, it frustrated me, and I don't recommend it. But there are parts of it that are interesting, and parts of it that are even a little fun. Thanks for watching. It's Seethe and Cope for NES and Famicom.